the happiness quotient, humanizing commerce. Joana Gyan Cudjoe is CEO and founder Golden Empire Legacy Limited. She is the biggest and only woman exporter of gold in Ghana. Linda Mthenjane is a clinical psychologist and the managing director of The Space Between Us, a human-centered digital mental health platform in tune with the African psyche. Amini Kajunju is the Chief Operating Officer at the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Presidential Center for Women and Development and has experience in high-impact national and international organizations.
Well, move over IQ, EQ and SQ are the new leadership traits. In the curriculum of the pandemic, along with agility and adaptability, empathy is an all-important subject, consisting of humane ways to communicate to a workforce post layoffs and lockdowns, even as the office of the future is still being constructed. So spiritual intelligence and well-being have become quite crucial. Are businesses aiming to make commerce human and humans happy? What can be done to keep up the morale as well as the mental health of employees? And in a world which is closer to bridging the gap between capital and labor, how can they lead with heart and a new level of emotional intelligence? Well, these are a few of the themes that we will be deep diving into with our panelists today. And as you can tell, all of them really representing a myriad of sectors of the economy that do speak to a great sense of mental wellness. Leaders within their own rights, such as the gold mining fraternity that is represented by my guest, Joana, Linda herself, who is a clinical psychologist, and of course, not forgetting the role that Amini does play in highlighting and profiling the voice of young women and girls across the continent. Ladies, really excited to have you all joining us for our panel. And I can see Amini settling in there, making sure camera angles are quite effective. And we will be deep diving into that conversation as always, making sure that we can pick up on a few themes. Whilst we allow Amini to get ready, perhaps Linda, I'd like to come to you. Given your professional background as a clinical psychologist, I can imagine the amount and depth of research that you've encountered, which has reflected on the mental wellness and mental health outcomes and what the pandemic has really highlighted in terms of its importance to an effective and productive workforce, primarily on a continent like Africa. Linda?
Yes, Gugu. Good afternoon to your listeners. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think what's important, just where we need to start, is let's not forget that even before the pandemic, we were dealing with 13% of the global population living with mental illness. We were dealing with depression as a leading factor in causing the burden of disease across the world and in Africa. But certainly what we found has been mixed in terms of results. I mean, on the one hand, you've had people being able to really sit back, reflect, make very clear decisions about the kind of life and the kind of world of work that they prefer. But on the other hand, you've also had burnout. You've had a culture of always on. You've had people struggling to manage the different roles that collided together. And I think collectively, we've been dealing with grief and we've been dealing with what we call ambiguous loss, which is really a sense that just as you find ground, that ground shifts again.
An important note, and perhaps to stay with you a little bit further, Linda, these are all emotions that, as you say, we might have dealt with before the pandemic, but have been exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic, loss of lives, loss of jobs, and of course, even our social distancing and working from home. How is it that business leaders perhaps have responded to some of these challenges, given that it's uncomfortable, it's not new, and it's not normal? So have we found that the strategies that have been implemented by certain business leaders have proven to be effective?
Yeah. So I mean, in the organizations that we work with, certainly the leaders that have taken full accountability for showing up as vulnerable human beings, telling their mental health hygiene stories, putting money where their mouth is in terms of investing in skills training, then it's gone a little bit easier. I mean, as we know, for a long time, the idea was that emotions don't belong in business, which actually makes no sense because we certainly use our emotions as we problem solve and as we make decisions. But organizations that have invested in things like training very much like we provide, I've found that the response has been really positive.
Well, we'll come back to that in a moment because there certainly are some key lessons we can learn from those strategies and I guess look to embed them and implement them in a variety of other sectors. Amini, I'd like to come to you here, primarily because you do work for an organization that looks to amplify the skills development, the voices and job creation opportunities of women and young girls. And that also speaks to, I guess, an understanding that we're well aware that the scales between women and men have been imbalanced largely before the pandemic, and I'm keen to understand what your insights are in terms of how the pandemic has likely exacerbated this particular challenge where women and young girls continue to be left by the wayside in terms of economic participation and activity. Any insights that you can share specifically from the center that you run?
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. As it was mentioned before, before the pandemic, there were some serious issues in underemployment and unemployment among our youth and also among women. We had, the sort of inadequate infrastructure, not just within our workplace, but outside of our workplace to support women and children and working women, especially single women, as it was mentioned in a previous conversation. And then there were issues of sort of, the climate change and the ravages of the climate change. And then let's not forget digital access. And so all of these issues were already in place before the pandemic. And since the pandemic, and as we're hopefully entering a post-pandemic world, these issues are still with us, and we really do need to do something about them. And in terms of inequality, as you can imagine, underemployment, unemployment, inadequate infrastructure, climate change, digital access, this all affects the woman and her ability to participate in our economy, in our social infrastructure, and in politics. And so I think one of the things that we as a society have to think about is how do we think about and continue to invest in the fundamentals? I think for me, the pandemic has shown us that the fundamentals are exactly what they are. They're fundamental because they work, whether there is a pandemic or not. And what are the fundamentals? The fundamentals that we have to invest in education. We have to invest in healthcare. We have to invest in basic infrastructure, water and electricity. We have to invest in digital access. These are the fundamentals, and they benefit both men and women.
Very important that you mention that, and we will come back to that in just a moment to unpack how it is that perhaps governments together working with business can really look to expand and explore even further on some of those opportunities. One such person who has had the ability to receive an investment in her education, receive an investment in her knowledge building, and of course even networks and opportunities to become one of the only female gold exporters in Ghana is our next guest who joins us, Joana. And Joana, grateful that you could take the time out to join us today. And I guess before we do get into some of the business insights, I guess we're quite keen to understand from your perspective how, again, reflecting on the last 2 years and of course the impact and plight of the pandemic, how it's not only affected you as a key leader in a male-dominated industry, but of course the outcomes and objectives that you're trying to achieve from a social development point of view, where your own female staff members have also been negatively impacted by the pandemic. How has this shifted the thinking and the narrative around prioritizing mental wellness?
Thank you very much. I think with my area of work as a miner, I've been in the mining industry for a long time, and the pandemic, in a way, people are complaining is very bad. To me, in a way, it's very good in the extent that someone like me, I was not very good in internet, and then I don't know how to do Zoom call. I don't know to do all of these things. And there's a lot of me out there, a lot of women out there who are women in mining, in the mining communities. And then when you talk about making calls, internet, Skype call, Zoom call, things like that, people don't know what it is. So this pandemic actually has also educated women in mining and people generally, like for everyone have to be close to your phone, your laptops. Even if you don't have a laptop, you have to buy it because you have to work from home. So in last 2 years, you can see from the mining community, people are complaining about health because they don't have good road and no good water, and especially with the educational sectors, you see people going to school under the tree. So when you look at people going to school under the tree and look at the environment so polluted and all of these things, it's not good health for people at all. So as a woman, what I've picked is to collaborate with some of the universities in Ghana, some of the schools in Ghana, and I'm taking care of about 100 students in some schools, and I have about 506 students in other schools where in the mining community, because I feel if a country can be successful, if a country can develop, it's all about education, like my sister said. And the only way we can have the change is to be educated. And then now people can actually learn from school on internet, where they can actually do exchange programs from other countries sitting in their own country. So it's very good. In the mining space.
Johanna, I'd just like to come in there because, again, we'll build up on the mining space and, of course, reflect on some of the macroeconomic outcomes. But I'm quite intrigued by the fact that I guess this panic, this frustration that we felt by the pandemic has actually helped jolt us into action. Like you say, adding more incredible amounts of effort into making sure that you're able to further develop the skills of the locals within the areas where you mine. And I'm intrigued to understand how perhaps you're finding a balance between the technical skills and abilities that you're trying to build up, which are important to improve productivity at your operations, but still making sure that you not only leading with the head, but leading with the heart, and making sure that this future workforce that you're building up is empathetic, is understanding to the changes that human nature has, and of course perhaps building up on their EQ, as has been mentioned, and SQ as a spiritual quotient. How are you prioritizing, or I guess striking a balance between the technical requirements but still humanizing your workforce given the outputs of the pandemic that we've experienced?
Well, thank you. I feel how the whole thing is looking at everyone is learning new things every day and looking at the change, and we have no choice. We have to do all of these things together. But at the end of the day, we need to do it. And if you really want to be able to know certain things and know how things are going, people are going through a lot of emotional problems, and because they love loved ones, family, they lost their job, and so many things that is happening. But we need to be strong to be able to work hard, and we need to be strong to accept what is there and what is not there, because it's come to stay and we need to move on. It's a time to move on, to work so hard, to find new strategy, new opportunity, new idea, to be able to implement it in your offices and your workplace, to be able to do what you can do.
Very true, and that's quite important. This takes me back to yourself, Amini, as we can perhaps explore and expand on this particular conversation, how it is that, again, going back to the infrastructure that's required in terms of skills development, training, schools, and empowering the female workforce, there are new collaborative efforts and avenues that we need to consider in terms of humanizing the human workforce as well. Are there some outcomes and some learnings that you'd like to piggyback from, given the feedback that we've heard from Joana, and maybe how this can be used as a blueprint for other entities, other communities, and other sectors of the economy to seek to implement?
Yeah, you know, what the pandemic has done, as awful of a situation that it has been, as it's been said, it's forced us to learn things that maybe we were slow to learn before. And one of the things that has come up is technology, the use of technology in the workplace, and dare I say, the use of technology to improve sort of the spiritual and emotional well-being of teammates. So I think of technology even to be used as a sort of a psychological safety. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you can plan conversations. You can be intentional in your learning and in your peer learning and in your peer interaction with technology. Nothing could ever replace, face-to-face communication and that human-to-human interaction. But as we are augmenting technology in our workplace, we can use it to support each other, to learn from each other, to learn skill set that we may not have before. So I think that's an important learning. The other thing that I think we have we have seen in this pandemic environment is that companies and institutions really do have to care about their employees. We can't really go back to a world, we can't go back to that world where we take employees for granted, we overwork, we underappreciate. We have to move forward to a world in which we that work-life balance is, it's one that we've been talking about a lot, but really attempting to allow the individuals that make your institution work be effective at work, but also be effective other places in their lives. This whole notion of bringing your full self to work, right? Your emotional self, your creative self, work environments that allow for that will make more money, will be more effective in solving problems. And so we're learning that, and I think that's another element. And then lastly, I think this notion of accountability. So flexibility that has come with sort of hybrid workplaces and being able to, work in different forms has also there's an added accountability both on the employer side and the employee side. So the price for flexibility is accountability, holding ourselves accountable, but also holding our employers accountable so that the work environment is a place where there is growth and there is prosperity for everybody.
Definitely. I like how you place an analogy there between the role that technology can play, I guess, as a psychological factor, improving with skills, improving with exposure to the necessary skills gap that we need to fill. But of course, also making sure that we also ensure that individuals show up as their full selves, which speaks to a very interesting theme, Linda, that I'm hoping that you can add some details onto. We are well aware that 2 years into the pandemic, strong vaccination drives that have been implemented the world over, but primarily here on the African continent, we are seeing that there's a slow return to the workplace. And for many corporates and large institutions, they are pursuing hybrid working models. In some sectors of the economy, it's just not possible. Individuals still need to show up in the physical form, in the mental form, and now even more in an emotional form. And I'm keen to understand on some of the themes that we've heard Amini highlight, how it is that perhaps corporates need to review their policies around human capital development that do speak to allowing people to show up as their full selves, whether they are connecting virtually or are present at the office. It seems as though it's a catch-22 and might leave a lot of companies confused as to what the best practice and approach might be. But are there some fundamentals that can be implemented here to ensure that human capital is still prioritized?
Yeah. So I love what Gugu, I love what Amini has said about coming to the workplace as your full self, because that is a fundamental principle. So no longer can organizations pretend that when we swipe at the gate or at the door, we leave who we are behind. So if we recognize that as a fundamental principle, what we then will do is a few things. One is help people do meaningful work. I mean, I think purpose-driven roles, and no matter the level in the organization, becomes absolutely critical in our ability to keep talent. The second thing I think that is absolutely critical at this point is inclusion. So organizations have spoken inclusions for many years, but now more than ever, as in my role as an executive in HR, for instance, we spoke a lot about employee value propositions. Now is the time for us to have customized employee value proposition, looking at different archetypes of employees and deciding the kind of flexibility arrangements, the kinds of remuneration, the kinds of policies that will be most suitable to getting the best out of employees while they feel like they have a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And of course, the third element is the leadership. The ability for leaders to have what we call supportive emotional conversations. Many a times, leaders have not been taught to have the kind of conversations that are not dismissive or belittling or minimizing the way people feel. Often we've been thinking that leaders mustn't show up as their full self because that ability gets people feeling like, I can't trust you, you're not strong enough. But the strength we've understood now comes from leaders being able to be vulnerable. Vulnerable, yet being very clear in the kind of support that they're willing to offer. And that vulnerability, Gugu, comes in many forms. I mean, one clear one are leaders being able to tell their story around what they've been through.
Yes.
What mental health hygiene that they currently embark on. And when they do that, they open up space for other people to be able to tell their story and even identify those who are unable to participate in these conversations. Because
Oh, we've just lost Linda there, unfortunately. But again, it's the world of technology. We will be sure to get her up despite the wonky line. But very critical element she mentioned there about being vulnerable and for leaders themselves to actually reflect on some of the challenges that they might face from a mental hygiene point of view. Linda, I trust that we've got you back on the line now. Some technical gremlins in the system, but hopefully your line is steady. Perhaps if you can pick up from the theme regarding vulnerability and how leaders can use that as a new way of encouraging members of their workforce to be just as vulnerable and then source and solicit the right solutions to address their challenges.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about vulnerability, I think what's also important to note is that we're not asking leaders to talk about things that are unsolved, because yes, that then exposes you in a way that makes it very difficult for people to actually look up to you. What we are talking about is your ability to be human, your ability, for instance, on the plus side, to be able to talk about some of the routines, some of the rituals that you put into place to make you feel a lot less like there is an element of control in your environment. I mean, control is a false notion. But I also believe very strongly that when leaders tell stories and allow the organization to be one where stories are common and stories are told, it gives permission, and it actually takes away people's need to hide and people's need to be fallen and stigmatized. We stigmatize because we worry that which is different will come onto us.
Yeah.
And we try to stay away from that. The ability, sorry, Gugu, I think what's one last thing that I do want to mention is that often what organizations have done in the past 2 years is bring what the so-called experts to organizations to talk about a myriad of psychological topics. That is a good first strategy. But your second strategy is one of preventative skills training. So we need to.
Well, we lost Linda there again very briefly, but we will come back to that theme, and it really underscores a very important element she mentioned in terms of preventative skills training. So avoiding the burnout before your staff gets burned out, avoiding the psychological negative effects when your staff do feel overwhelmed, either by external factors, either by the work environment, or even life in general, as we are aware that as human beings, we all face pressures on different fronts. And this gets me excited because, Joana, I guess, as a CEO in a male-dominated sector, some of the qualities that Linda highlighted earlier about power, about control, about being strong, about being tough, being a woman in a male-dominated industry. You yourself in your personal capacity, Joana, must have faced immense pressure because, as you've mentioned, you need to show up with the technical ability, you need to show up as a leader appearing to be in control. And I'm keen to understand from you, perhaps, if there are some insights and nuggets you can share with us about personalizing your journey around vulnerability and also being aware of the fact that you work in a very competitive sector. Just looking at where the gold price right now is, that's a key commodity and resource of yours. And of course, the price influences output and motivation and productivity as well as revenue. But how are you reviewing your strategy, not just to focus on the gold price and gold as a commodity, but also focusing on human resource, as that is the most critical part of your organization and driving growth there. So Joana, a bit of a personal view, but of course also making sure that we speak to how you're unfolding this as a key strategy right across the rest of your business.
Thank you very much. I feel in the mining sectors, most of the things that we face over there, I mean, they're all men, and I don't see women around there. Gold is not for girls. But then again, gold is very beautiful thing. When you come across the area that you see gold, you can actually use gold to develop the whole country, the whole nation. And I feel everybody in the mining community deserve to have a good life. So one of my strategy is to build a world-class refining, gold refining, where it's actually like a gold souk. But in the, you find a school, you find hospital, you find so many things where we can actually bring people together to actually train people. And most of the mining community, most of the guys there, they are not educated, they don't go to school because like everyone has to work hard. And as 18 years, 16 years, you have to work like someone who is over 60 years, which is not right. So what I've noticed is that we need education in that sector, where I am looking to build the schools and already helping the people to do the right thing. So with being in the gold area, what we can do is to structure in a way that even the people like banking sectors can come to the mining community. Like if you building the real estate developers, they don't want to come to the village. They don't want to go to the hinterland because they feel like it's so far away, like 9 hours drive, 12 hours drive from the big city. And then people don't want to go there. So if we made people, the leaders to come around, then everybody in the country should be able to come around to make the place comfort. I feel we can create like a Switzerland in Europe in the mining community. If we're able to create that platform where we have the Switzerland in Europe, in the community that we come from, in the area that we born, in the area that we know we had nothing, but we can actually create something with it becomes something powerful where the whole world will chase it, like the gold. Very soon from now to the next 10 years, I see people will come and buy just a gold coins with the tomatoes, or if they want to buy a pail of shoe, they would like to buy with the gold coins because the cryptocurrency, the digital marketing, the blockchain, everyone is thinking of gold now. So Africa can actually come together, use the natural resources that we have in Ghana, have in South Africa, have in Uganda, have in Zimbabwe, everywhere in Africa that there's gold. We can actually structure the whole country where we don't need to go for loan anymore.
Exactly.
So, and this is the time we need the women to come in because women have to work. I want to see women becoming leaders in the country. In the Parliament House, we need to see women because if you're a woman, you are powerful and more than 10,000 men in you. So if we're able to work so hard, believe what you have, we can create nations under women where women leading the people, women leading the community, women leading the banks, women leading the parliament, women leading everywhere you find yourself, where actually we can actually help people to develop the people to add an impact where people can actually believe that I can also do it.
Definitely.
Because some people have a lot of good things in them, but because we don't have good training, we don't have people who believe in us, we don't have people who can encourage us. So we feel we are not in a good position to stand in a certain platform to even express ourselves. So if the team, the people, emotionally, you are tormenting, you are distressed because you feel like you cannot do it.
Exactly.
But you can only do it when someone actually come closer. Hey, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. Even if you fail 10,000 times, you can still do it. You can
Johanna,
still make
and I
it.
think that's such an important note that you mentioned there, accepting failure, which is something that many people have been through, either through entrepreneurs, either through job losses, especially during this tumultuous time. But I love how you are reassuring us of the fact that not only do women have 10,000 men in them, but that a gold life is a good life. And that's the kind of life that we all should be cultivating while still being aware of the fact of the harsh realities of the world, but being nimble enough to flow and to change and to respond as is required by the circumstances. Amini, I'd like to come back to you here because I guess even in light of reflecting on the recent pandemic that we're still currently under, there's been several studies that have highlighted the fact that female leadership has brought the survival of entities, of countries. I guess New Zealand is one of the countries that does stand out quite significantly as to how best women have shown up empathetically to actually conquer some of these mental health challenges and, of course, showing a greater sense of vulnerability, which does respond to the time that we're in. Help us unpack how, without taking anything away from our male counterparts, but how female leadership globally has actually provided a significant example as to how it is that we can humanize commerce, we can humanize politics, and prioritize that even in addressing key commercial challenges.
I was actually speaking to a colleague this morning and saying that a certain leader, whose name I will not mention, could use female energy, and that if he had more female energy, we would not be in this horrific situation that we find ourselves in, that is actually going to have a global impact. Even though it's happening in a specific part of the world, we are all going to be affected by it. So to go back to your question, it's been proven over and over again that A, cannot be excluded from the decision table. We must be at the decision table, and B, women bring a certain set of skill sets and aspirations and emotions and EQ that is very critical. And what are they? It's worth repeating. I think we know what they are, but it's worth repeating here. Empathy is critical to leadership. If you're not an empathetic leader, you're going to leave a lot of impact on the table. We talk about leaving money on the table, but you're going to leave a lot of impact on the table if you're not empathetic. The second thing that women bring is the ability to communicate with empathy, right? So we go back to empathy. That communication with empathy is critical to successful leadership. The third thing that women bring is the idea of being able to understand the motivation of everybody around the room and trying to figure out a way to meet people where they are and come up with a solution that works for as many people as possible. It's not a linear way of thinking, but it's a way of thinking that brings all the ideas together. So that's a very critical element of female leadership. And then last but not least, we think about the consequences, not just for today, but in 5 years, in 10 years. And so the long-term view is a critical element of female leadership, and it's a critical element of successful leadership.
Very true, and I think so pertinent that you mentioned that again, this does call for an increase in women leadership. I do stand to be corrected here, but as far as I'm aware, the history books have never quoted that a woman in leadership has ever gone to war. So quite important for us to be mindful of that as we allow ourselves to show up as our full selves in our workplaces, as we allow leaders to be more empathetic, more vulnerable by providing solutions to challenges that we all might face. This is really where we can prioritize a better human workforce which is able to be productive, which is able to be mentally alert and aware and fully present, by not only being led by their head but their heart as well, by also being quite clear on what value proposition it is that they bring to the table, regardless of which sector it is that they happen to work in. I'd like to thank my guests again for their amazing contribution to this conversation, which will interlink with a myriad of other themes that we will unpack here throughout the course of the day. A big thank you to Joana Gyan Cudjoe, who's the CEO and founder of Golden Empire Legacy, Mthenjane, clinical psychologist and managing director of The Space Between Us, and not forgetting Amini Kajunju, Chief Operations Officer at the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Center. Thank you so much for joining us today, and of course a gentle reminder that we can be vulnerable, we can show up as our full selves, and of course be equally present in the various spaces that we do occupy.